people find it very hard to track the conversation. When you've got an image like this, you can kind of see where we've gone. And
I was thinking that, it might take us 2 hours, but now it took us more than 2 hours just to cover one aspect of God's existence. So Alhamdulillah.
But that's what I said to you when you asked. He's like, oh, do you think I'd say you could talk about this for like 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 hours? No, like, and this is just one line of reasoning.
Right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Incisive Thoughts. And today we have another power-packed episode within the GORAPS series. And today is going to be the meat of the discussion. Because today we're going to make a case for God's existence. How can we make a case for God's existence? And we have our brother Yusuf Ponders with us. He is going to dive deep into the topic. So without taking any more time, I would like to ask you, how can, if someone does not believe in God's existence, what route can I take and how can I actually show them that yes, God does exist?
Yeah, so Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem. So there are lots of different paths that you could take. So there's something important we sort of need to say here, that when we say there are lots of paths or many paths, it is not to say all paths are a path to truth. As an example, if you're trying to travel from Manchester to London, there are many different routes that you can take to get there. Yeah, you can go down this road, that motorway. You could take a scenic route. You could go around the long way. But there are lots of different paths that you could take to get there. And if someone gives you any one of these maps, if that is your destination, you can get there. And some people prefer certain routes than others, and some people are like, oh no, I can't. I've got a big distaste for Birmingham. I don't want to go anywhere near that town. Or whatever reason it is, they may prefer a different route. But if someone gives you a map that drives you to Edinburgh and it finishes there, that map is not going to get you to your destination, especially if you're trying to get to London. The map to Edinburgh is useful. Yeah. So yes, there are many paths to truth, but that does not mean it, like the sort of the Hindu motif where it's like all paths are a path to truth. That's not true.
So perennialism or all of those kind of ideas.
Yeah. And it's not to say there are not kernels of truth as well in other paths. Like for example, in the Vedas, in the beginning, it talks. There's a heavy emphasis on monotheism, on not worshipping idols, and somehow that got corrupted along the way, and now there's a lot of idols. In other cases, like if you look at like the Scandinavian religions, all of the pantheon, they're all born, but there's this sort of like mysterious source at the beginning, that gives rise to everything. And you can kind of see traces of monotheism. There's some really good episodes on the Ayera podcast with a brother called Jerry. May Allah bless him. He's a really good brother. And on the hidden history of monotheism. And it's following this trend that you can see the kernels of Tawheed across the planet. And there is a good case to make, essentially, that it's not, according to popular opinion, that everything started off as polytheism and then it sort of whittled its way down to monotheism, which it doesn't even make sense if you think about it as well. Like if you're going to make a polytheistic religion, you've got to begin with one God. Like you don't go from 0 to 50. Like you if you're inventing gods, you would first have to invent the first one and then invent the second and then the third, and you would go in order like that, and then the number would increase. So like even that should be enough to sort of convince someone that there's a problem with that theory. But just historically speaking, there's also a good case to make that there seems to be a good case to make that monotheism was and you've had Jerry on your podcast.
It's interesting because that has been somewhat an area of my research as well. And Jerry Coughlin has presented his longest video on this channel itself. So anyone who's interested, he can watch the video. It's titled The Legacy of Monotheism Across Cultures. And there's a lot of evidence that we speak about regarding how monotheism was the first religion. And, there is anthropological evidence and many things that you can derive, even from some evidence from cognitive science can show how animism was not the first religion, stuff like that. but maybe we can touch it. We can keep that topic for maybe oneness of God. And I think there's a lot of things that I can gather and present regarding that topic. When it comes to God's existence, like before even diving into the topic of God's existence, like someone may ask, but what do you mean by God? Like what is God?
Yeah. So that's exactly what I'm sort of typing out now. So,
Oh,
when we're trying to prove God's existence, it's good to sort of clarify what exactly we mean when we're saying what it is we're trying to prove. And so for this reason, it is important to sort of mention the attributes here that we're trying to prove. And so when we're saying God, we don't mean like a deistic God. We don't mean like one of the polytheistic gods like Thor that was born, that had a beginning, etc. We mean something very specific. So what we mean is that by God, we mean that a being that is necessary. That is to say, his non-existence is impossible.
okay. So now I understood why the topic of monotheism was actually brought into the discussion, is because you wanted to clarify that when we are talking about God, it's not like the sky daddy or this flying spaghetti monster and all. We are not talking about all of that. People can get confused, and this is why we have to clarify that we have a specific definition, a specific attributes of God, which generally in this pantheistic religions and these kind of religions, what God is depicted to be, we are not making a case for those
Exactly.
characters.
Yeah. And another thing is as well,
That's
some people, and this is related to the trauma thing we were talking about. Some people, they have a sort of knee-jerk reaction, like when they touch a hot pan, their hand just flies off. When they hear the word God, they have an aversion to it. This is a lot more the case, especially with like a lot of this comes from like ex-Christians. So people who are ex-Christian, especially if they've gone to a Christian school and they've had a Christian upbringing, they've been really given this idea of what, like you say, this quote unquote this this sky daddy, or the man in the sky with the beard and the ones that we can paint pictures of. It looks like an old man. So this is like the polytheistic vision of a god, like the Greeks envisioned, or like the Scandinavians envisioned. It's a man, yeah. And that's not what we're trying to prove here at all. What we're trying to do is show there is something that has certain characteristics, certain attributes. And so the first one here would be that it is a necessary being, yeah, which is to say its non-existence is impossible. It can't cease to exist. It can't be the case that this thing ever ends, and it can't be the case that this thing ever was not in existence in the past, which is another way of saying it's eternal. Yeah, it's self-sustaining. It's not dependent, so it's independent. These are all related to the idea of this of God being a necessary being. Yeah, it's not, his non-existence is impossible. It's eternal. That is to say, he always has been and always will be. He's self-sustaining. Yeah, which is to say, like he's not relying on others on other things for his existence. Obviously, I'm using pronouns here because I'm a believer. You could change that to for in terms of the necessary being. The atheists would probably prefer that, but I'm not an atheist, so I'm not going to do that. But it's arbitrary. Like it's just insert whatever you need to there to make this easier for you to digest. But you get the point.
Yeah. So one more thing, wouldn't we say that this is not a mindless process, something that does not having a mind, just a mindless power, but something that has a mind, or not using the word mind, but
I wouldn't use the word mind,
conscious,
but
conscious or something.
There's other things that we're going to say. So it has a will. Yeah.
Yeah, it has a will.
Say that it decides things, and makes choices. And this is related to purpose as well. So like, does things with reason. Like Allah says in the Quran, for example, do they think that we made them, without reason, without
aimlessly?
purpose? Yeah, aimlessly. It's not that. So we'll say it does not do things aimlessly. Aimlessly. it also means that this is alive. It has life.
Yeah. Al-Hayy is one of his attributes.
Yeah. We're saying that this being is all powerful. Yeah. That it's the source of all power.
Hmm.
We're saying it is the all-knowing. We're saying it's the most wise. There may be other attributes as well that I want to sort of focus on. There's a lot. Allah has many attributes. We've got 99 names for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But essentially, there's certain ones that are important that we want to sort of prove to get the bare bones. I would say some of these can be proved rationally. And when it comes to many of the others, what we would do is we would prove the Quran. And the Quran itself affirms many of these other attributes. Yeah. And so if the Quran is from God and it is a trustworthy source, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a messenger from God, then you can deduce lots of other things. But it gets to a point where once you've figured certain things out, like these ones in particular, then it shouldn't be too difficult for you to recognize that what we're talking about here is a God. Yeah, it's a personal God.
Yeah.
That sends revelation. Yeah, that is interested in communicating with its creation and guiding it. Yeah, and that it's capable of doing so. It's not just this deist God. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about something that has very specific attributes. We're not talking about like just this multiverse generator. It's a particular thing. And we're obviously, and this sort of ties into later on with the rest of GORAP, that it's worthy of worship, that you should be directing worship towards it. And we're going to be, when you're focusing on God's existence, you don't necessarily need to prove this immediately. It is something necessary for being a Muslim, but it's something you can put on the back burner till we get to that step. Or if for whatever reason someone does accept all of this, you would jump to that step. Because like a deist, for example, might believe God exists, uninterested in us. They might not think he's really worthy of worship or in need of worship. Someone might be a misotheist. They may believe in God but hate God. Like the devil, for example, like Shaitan, he's someone who's working against God. He won't submit to God. He thinks himself better than he is.
And just one interesting point that I mentioned, which I had heard Basim Az-Zawadi or someone mentioning, which is very interesting. And it was, again, connected to this aspect of worship, which is he mentioned that, no matter how much proofs for God's existence we present, like, or we have, we can, Iblis or Shaitan, like which we consider to be the devil, has more proof for God's existence than you and me. But yet that does not help him to actually accept him, God, as being worthy of worship. Because there is one more element, which is accepting God's moral edict above everything else, which is where Shaitan, kind of does not do that. He has more proofs for not just God's existence, like, for the whole GORAP without the S, he might believe in everything. He might believe without actually acknowledging that, God is worthy of worship. In his behavior, you would see that. But one thing is very interesting is that in terms of rational proof for Islam and for God's existence, he might have that, but that does not help him because there is this element of accepting it and, accepting God's moral edict. So this is where he lacks. So
submitting to it. And this links to what a Muslim is. Like, so what is a Muslim? The word Muslim and Islam, they derive from the triliteral Arabic, Sin, Lam, Mim. Yeah. And Islam means submission. Submission to what? Submission to God's will. Which is why we refer to Isa alayhi salam as a Muslim, because he's someone who submitted to God's will. It's why we refer to Adam alayhi salam as a Muslim, because he is someone who submitted to God's will. Musa alayhi salam, a Muslim, submitted to God's will. And that means that when God sends them revelation, they follow it. They follow the prophets at the time, or they follow the guidance given to them at their time. Obviously, the prophets themselves are prophets, and people are following them. And we consider them Muslim because they're dedicated to doing what God commands them to do in the context that they're in, and with regards to the information they have been given at the time. That makes them a Muslim, someone who submits, because the meme at the beginning of Muslim is the doer of the action, Islam being the action.
Wow.
And the meme is the doer of Islam, the Muslim, the one who submits. And the shaitan here, he has knowledge of God's existence. He recognizes God's existence. There's not a shubhat in regards to that, but he's not a Muslim because he's not submitting. And this also links into why, for example, some people say, well, why are the the modern Jews or Christians, why do we not consider them Muslim? They believe in God, and they say they submit to God's will, and it's, well, no, they don't, because as far as we're concerned, God has sent more prophets. With regard to the Jews are concerned, God sent Isa alayhi salam to them. They rejected him. God sent Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. They're rejecting him. They won't follow the Quran as guidance. It's the final revelation. They do not accept that. Now, if God has sent the Quran as final revelation, in order to be a Muslim, if you're aware of its existence, you need to be following it. You need to submit to it. If Allah is saying in the Quran, if God is saying to you, worship me alone and follow the Quran and obey Allah and obey the messenger and seek wisdom and guidance from the people of knowledge. And who are they? The people who are submitted fully and wholly to the Quran and the Sunnah. Then in order to be a Muslim, you need to be doing that as well. And insofar as Christians and Jews are aware of the Quran and of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and are either actively rejecting him, or in some strange cases, even recognizing him as a prophet, but then continuing to be a Christian, then they're not.
I've had those people, like, some scholars have spoken, they said the same thing. Anyway, one more interesting thing, and we'll just dive into the topic, because I think, we have this habit of touching, some subjects that are connected, but not directly relevant to the topic. It's like Shaitan is also mentioned, in the Quran, Shaitan is called as kafir. So again, that kind of links back to what we are saying. Why is he called a kafir when he actually, in terms of his knowledge, he accepts all of that? Because there is another element that, as you mentioned. So how do we go back to God's existence? Now we have defined what God is.
So there are many different ways of exploring that, and there are all of these paths we can say that you can take. So there's different arguments you can use. Independently, they might not necessarily be enough. You may need other things as well that you add to them. And I'm going to be doing this, and you're going to see that as we go down the path that I like to take in particular. And maybe what you can do is, if you bring other guests on that prefer other paths, you can try and explore that path with them. So what we're going to do is we're going to explore the path of the argument from dependency. And then we're going to basically be trying to tick off as many of these as possible until we get to a point where we think, okay, we've reasonably gotten to a point now where we can affirm that this exists. Be a reason. And again, this isn't the only thing. There are people that may come to recognize God's existence without doing this at all. It might just be simply that they that their fitra is just cleaned, or whatever it is that they go through personal experiences. If they end up on truth, class, I'm happy with that, so long as it's truth at the end. But so there are different arguments. You could have the Kalam argument, which focuses on the fact that the universe had a beginning. You've got arguments from design, which look at the intricate design of the universe. Arguments from the fitra, so on and so forth. And
argument from consciousness, and there are many others, but for now,
so this you could.
In the end, maybe we can talk about just give them some avenues if someone's interested. Maybe we can give them some resources as to, if you want to look for more arguments, this is where on my channel I have some arguments which are unique arguments for God's existence, and we can talk about them as well. So,
it's just self-reference, I think, is the best, because you don't want to overwhelm people with too many different things that go here, go there. So I would say just have a look at the other videos that Khalid has got on his channel, because he's exploring many of these different things. But also have a look at the Sapiens Institute website, learn, or just go to sapiensinstitute.org, and from there you can get access to our learning portal, which has got lots of free courses on there. You can have a look at them. You could also get access to our books and our articles that are on there as well. And I think all of these things, inshallah, will be of a great benefit to you. But what we're going to do is we're just going to be focusing on the argument from dependency. And this will link later on as well to things like the argument from design, because we're going to use this argument to argue for certain attributes. Yeah. So, for example, that Allah is knowing and wise and powerful, etc. And it's something that when I said you might link certain things together in order to do that. And this is the way that I would do it personally. So I'm going to begin here. So what is the argument?
So what is dependency? Yeah.
Yeah. So you begin in the world. So where do you begin? Where does everyone begin? Yeah. Everyone begins in a world with lots of things around them. Yeah. If you're watching this right now, pause for a second, look about you, and you could ask certain questions. Yeah. What can I know that's sort of common about everything in my experience? What's common between this and this and this and that and this and me and you and my mum and my friends and everything that I can point at and engage with? What's in all of them? Yeah. And when you ask that, there's many things you can come up with. But a popular phrase that is used by philosophers is all of these things are contingent. Now, to avoid the word contingent, because I've recognized when certain people hear it, you can see their eyes glaze over. It feels like a cursed word at this point. And if you're interested in these things, you won't have a problem with it. But for some reason, some people do. So I just tried to say dependent, because it's essentially the same thing. Something contingent depends on other things for its existence. Yeah, in order to exist, other conditions need to be in place. Yeah, for it to exist. We could also say that its existence is possible. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And so is its non-existence. And a nice way of putting this is that its existence can be turned on and off like a light switch. Yeah, so just like I've got these lights, I can, there's two modes that this torch can have. It can be on, it could be off. Yeah, there's no in the middle. Some people might go, but you can make it brighter. No, but that's still on. Whether it's that bright or that bright, it's on. Yeah. So either it's on or off. Existence is the same. Existence can either be on, like it is for me and you now, or it can be off, like it was when we weren't born, or when we die. And may Allah give us a long life. But existence is something that can be turned on and off. It has two modes: on, off. And then that raises the question: is that all there is? Is it just contingent things? Is it just things that are dependent? Yeah? Or is there another kind of existence? So then what we could do is from here, we can say, okay, so if existence can be turned on and off, existence has two modes. Yeah. One on, two off. How many different ways could this express itself in a particular being? Yeah, so you've got three ways. You've got one, you have what we recognize exists already. Yeah, contingent existences. And these things are things that we said they can so that they can exist and they can not exist. Yeah. So at one minute they could be there, next minute they could not. That existence can be turned on and off. On and off. Yeah. Okay. What else could we say? If you've only got these two modes of possibilities, what other kind of being could we talk about? The second would be impossible.
Yeah. Are there things that will or never exist?
Yes, impossible existences. So this is something, as you said, cannot exist. Yeah. That is to say, its existence cannot be turned on. Its existence is always off.
So is it like a squared circle? Like a square circle can never be in existence.
Exactly. So with this, I'll give you an example. So this is just everything. Example, everything you experience. Yeah, so we've got lots of evidences that these things can and do exist. You are yourself an evidence of this. With regards to this one, existence always off. An example is the squared circle, the married bachelor, so on and so forth. Don't want to go over.
So why does a squared circle cannot not like can never exist? Because by definition there's a contradiction. Is that?
Yeah. So the reason these things cannot exist is because, as you said, they contain a contradiction.
Okay.
And say you are saying something is true and it is false about the same thing in the same way at the same time. So, for example, either I exist or I don't exist. I can't exist and not exist at the same time. Which is the whole point about existence. Has two modes. It can either be on or it can be off. Yeah. I can't be on and off simultaneously. My light switch here, that cannot be on and off at the same time in the same way. Yeah. One moment it can be on, the next moment it can be off, but not in the same way at the same time. Yeah. That's called a contradiction. Now, what about a squared circle? Well, what makes a square? Actually, I'll go with the married bachelor because it's a bit simpler.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be married? Yeah, the definition of being married is to have a wife or have a husband.
Yeah.
Partner, have someone you are married to. The definition of a bachelor is to not have a wife, to not have a husband, to not be married. It is literally the negation of the other thing. And so when you have these two words that have a relationship to each other, one is the negation of the other. They cannot exist in the same thing at the same time. I can't be married and not be married simultaneously. I'm either married. Yeah. A square.
So these,
go on.
Yeah, I mean, so like I understood, like we got the point. So we got contingent existence, which can exist and cannot exist. Another one is impossible existence, which can never exist. I mean, well, like the marriage bachelor example was a very good one. So now, is there a third type of existence which is like it always has to exist?
Yeah. So the third one would be like if you've only got these two modes of existence, so you've got one that can turn on and off. You've got one that can only ever be off and never on. And then the last one would be the opposite of that. So this would be necessary existence. And that is, it has to exist. Its non-existence is impossible. There's many ways you can word this. Its non-existence is impossible. Necessary has it. Its existence is always on and never off. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you'll notice it's the opposite here of this. Always off.
Yeah.
Never on. Yeah. So you've got one where it's like, and if we're thinking in terms of the light switch again, so a contingent existence is one that if I press the button, the existence can be turned. The light is the metaphor, obviously, for existence. So this is a existence where you turn it on and off. This is an impossible existence where no matter how often I press the button, it never turns on. Yeah, and this is a necessary existence. No matter how often I press the button, it never turns off.
Right.
Yeah. Those are 3 ways that something with 2 modes of existence, on or off, can operate. Either it works, and in terms of being able to turn it on and off, it doesn't work, as in you can never turn it on, or it's always on. Yeah, it always works. It's always on, and you can never turn it off. And so these are the 3 things. At the moment, we've got we don't need to convince anyone that this one exists. Yeah, because it's quite clear that it does exist. You've got examples of it. You don't need to necessarily, although sometimes you do have to have this conversation. But an impossible existence, by definition, is impossible. It can't exist. Yeah, and the point is that this isn't. You're never going to find evidence of this thing existing because it cannot exist.
Right.
And there's a discussion you can have about that. We've gone over it briefly and explained it. That should be sufficient. Some people are a bit argumentative. They may want to go into it a bit more. But for the purposes of this, I think we've covered it enough. And then lastly is the necessary existence. This is the one that's in question.
So we have any example of or a necessary existence, like which has to be that, for example, 2 + 2 = 4. Is that something that is necessary? It has to always 2 + 2 has to always be 4, no matter which planet you are, no matter if you're outside space and time, you're inside space and time. Is that a good example?
So that might be a bit of a separate discussion. So because there you're getting into a discussion about like abstract objects and truths.
Yeah.
So this is more just about ontology, which is to talk about the
So we are talking about being,
particular thing.
Beings,
a
non-existence of principles and stuff.
Well, we're talking about things that exist, because now we're talking about the we're trying to figure out what is this reality about? Yeah, what can I deduce from knowing that these things exist? I'm asking this question: is that all there is? This is the one we're trying to find an answer to. So I'll tell you what, I'll just I'll make another one.
Okay. So can someone, so this would be a better question, I think. So can someone just believe in the existence of the switches that can be on and off, and the existence of switches that is always off? I don't want to believe in the third switch, which is always on. How would you convince me that this has to be a thing that exists?
Repeat the question.
So let's say I'm just trying to be devil's advocate here. So now I believe in only 2 types of existences. One is contingent existence, and one is impossible existence. Why do I have to believe in something like a necessary existence?
Yeah, good question. And that's at this point, we're saying, okay, that's exactly where I would expect you to be. Yeah. If you're in a state of disbelief, it'd be surprising to me if you would just instantly say, yeah, this one does exist. Yeah, especially if you've not really thought about it too much. So that's a good question. So from here, we can say that maybe the average person, they're not going to argue about this one. We don't need to explore that anymore. They're not going to argue necessarily about this one, although they can. This is the one this is the one that they're going to have a problem with, the necessary existence. And so we're going to focus on this one. So then we say, okay, so how then, let's begin by saying that there is no necessary existence. Yeah. So you start by just assuming there is no necessary existence. What are the consequences of that? How does that look? What are the possible, if there's only contingent things? Yeah.
So let's say, like, now if a person does not believe in a necessary existence, correct me if I'm wrong, the problem I see is if all contingent existence, each existence is dependent on another one, and it is dependent on another one, and then that one is dependent on another one, will that go at infinitum? or there has to be a foundation?
Right. So this is it. So then we can have a look. All right. You've got contingent things, and that means that this thing is dependent upon that thing. That thing is dependent upon that thing, and so on and so forth. And you've got a chain of dependencies. Yeah. Like I am dependent upon my mum and my dad, the earth, this atmosphere, food, water, etc. There's a bunch of things, a bunch of conditions I am dependent upon. These things, like my mum and my dad, they have things they're dependent upon. And so you would go back and so you have this sort of like line of dependencies, kind of like this graph, you know, this is dependent upon that, which is dependent upon that, which is dependent upon that, and so on and so forth. Now, how many different ways can we think of a world in which there are only dependent things? So the first one is like the finite chain. Yeah. Finite chain. Which is basically to say that there is a line of dependent things going into the past that has an end. When you're going into the past, eventually you reach an end. A line of dependent things going into the past that has an end. And essentially, before this, there was nothing. This is the whole everything. So everything came from nothing.
Okay.
So everything began to exist and came from nothing. Yeah. And so the way we would imagine that then is that, as I said, then that you have one line and then another and then another and then another. So like if I was to draw it, yeah. So you've got now. Sorry, I'm trying to draw with my mouse. It's a bit difficult. So that's now, and then this moment is all dependent upon moment one, moment two, moment three, and then it goes all the way back, dot, 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 for however long to the first thing. And then before that was nothing.
And this does not necessarily have to be in terms of moments or time. It can be anything, like, for example, things that are dependent, right? Or it has to be a time.
Yeah. So these lines here could be in terms of a dependency relationship. So they could exist at the same time. Like that could be me. That could be my mum and my dad. My mum and dad can live at the same time as I do. Yeah, so it's not that like that moment has to end and then this one begins. This could just be talking about a dependency.
For example, like, for example, plants are dependent on the sun is dependent on fusion, nuclear fission, and all of that, which is all happening at the same time, but they are all having a dependent chain in the same moment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's what we're talking about there. So that's one possibility. You've got a finite chain of things that goes back into a finite past, and then it ends at some point, and you have this first thing that pops into existence, begins to exist, and that before that there was nothing. There was nothing, and the first thing popped into existence from nothing. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is the circular dependency. Circular dependency.
Which would be...
circular... Go on.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
No, go on.
No, I was saying circular dependency would be something like A causes B, B causes C, C causes D, D causes E, and E causes A. So there is no, contingent things are in like a circular cycle.
Yeah. So exactly what you said. So A causes B, which causes C, which causes D, which causes A.
Yeah.
So on and so forth. And you go back and around and around and around. For those who prefer visual things, what that would look like is you would have me, and I depend upon my dad, who depends on my granddad, Who depends on my great granddad?
Who depends on you?
Who depends on me?
Okay.
Yes, this is a circular dependency. You've got this return back to the beginning of things depending essentially upon themselves for their own existence before they exist. Yeah, so that's another point. So, yeah, you've just got
so we got it. So these are two possibilities where someone can choose these two possibilities to evade existence of the switch that is always on, like the necessary existence.
Yeah,
There
well, there's another one. Yeah, there's a third one. Well, there's four.
Okay.
But the fourth one ends up having to suggest the necessary existence. But at the beginning, we're saying that's not possible. Yeah. Okay. And then what you're going to do is you're going to have a look at these. And then if all of these are impossible, if it turns out each of these are actually impossible existences, because as we said before, they cannot exist. Yeah. Like the squared circle, that is what is an impossible existence, contains a contradiction. Yeah. So we're trying to establish whether any of these can it actually be the case, or whether or not trying to say that the universe is one of these is equivalent to saying the universe is a married bachelor. Yeah.
Right. So what is the third possibility?
So the third possibility is infinite chain.
Okay.
An infinite chain. Yeah. Which is to say, A depends upon B, depends upon C, so on and so forth, forever and ever. Yeah, that it goes on infinitely. Not what I wanted. Yeah, and so it has no end. Yeah, forever and ever.
Okay.
Has no end, and that essentially that is what existence is. And so for those again that need visual, that would be A, B, C, and that would just be infinity. You would never stop going back. That's the infinite chain. Yeah. So these are three things that people might posit are the case.
So which one out of these three you think is the most problematic? And let's start with that one.
We'll just go through them in order. Okay. So with regards to the finite chain, are there any problems with this? So the idea that we're going to hone in on is that everything came from nothing. So here we have to ask, well, what is nothing? Yeah. What is nothing? When we're talking about nothing, we're not talking about Lawrence Krauss.
Scientific nothing.
Yeah. Not talking about when we're not talking about when I say there is nothing in this cup. Yeah. We're not talking about Lawrence Krauss's nothing. I can't spell his name. We mean absolutely nothing.
In the philosophical sense, where there are no attributes, there are no causal conditions.
The negation of all positive attributes. The negation of all positive attributes. So like sometimes when people say the vacuum is nothing. No, the vacuum is not nothing. The vacuum has attributes. The vacuum, me and you can go into the vacuum.
It's spatial.
It has spatial dimension. It has up, down, left, right. There are things occurring in it. There are events.
And people's and then some conferences say that it has a sea of energy. Even if it's vacuum, it has a sea of energy where particles come in and they might pop. But that is because there is energy and within that vacuum, it is not like absolute nothing. There are things that are going on inside the vacuum.
Yeah. And without going into it too much as well, there may be more to space than just those three dimensions. There may be ways in which it connects to higher dimensions, which is the whole point of things like string theory, etc. and it could be.
Yeah. So and then there are principles that are governed within that vacuum, which like the laws of physics, which are mathematically described, they still govern. So there are laws governing the vacuum. So that is also a thing that cannot be said to be nothing. Like for example, Stephen Hawking might say that the universe came from nothing, but then he gives the law of gravity as something that is where the universe comes from. For that is not nothing. That is a law that you're prescribing to.
You're describing something. Yeah, like with Lawrence Krauss, for example, like he's like writing this whole book about how the universe comes from nothing, and when he's like nothing has all of these attributes. Like nothing is one hell of a something for him, and he's playing a word game. It's like essentially you've got this thing, you have something, and it's like we need a noise that we make to represent that something, and he's suggesting the noise that we make be the word nothing. Yeah. And the thing is it's like, and then what he wants to try and do is say, well, therefore it can come from nothing. And he's trying to say that anyone who says that it can, and so he's arguing with a different definition, and he's sort of talking over philosophers that are saying, no. When we're talking about nothing, we're not talking about this thing that has all these attributes. That's what we would define as a thing. Yeah. And it's such a slimy way of trying to just call something this word so that he can get away now with telling everyone that, oh no, the universe came from nothing. It's just a word game. Now, the problem is that when we define nothing like this, because that's what we're interested in, because that's what this is about. Yeah. It's a finite chain that goes into a past, and the first thing pops into existence from absolutely nothing. If you want to list something and say that there's a bunch of attributes that it has, and that it always has been the case, and so on and so forth, I'm sorry, what you're doing here is you're describing what? A necessary existence. You're saying that there was this state of nothingness, and it always has been, and always will be, and it was just there, brute facts, and it had all of these attributes, and so on and so forth. And the first contingent thing popped into existence in that vacuum, in that nothing, in whatever it is that you want to call it. And that's just to make an argument for a necessary existence. But with here, we're saying, no, there is no necessary existence. So when we're talking about nothing and we're talking about the finite chain,
interesting,
you can't mention a thing that has these eternal attributes. We by necessity, for the sake of this. Say again.
The above one.
Yeah. For the sake of going through this line of thinking, if we're going down this path, and if you're tracking the conversation, what you'll recognize is that if we're saying that there is no necessary existence, because that's important, that's the whole point of this thought experiment. If there is no necessary existence, then when we're saying everything comes from nothing, we cannot use Lawrence Krauss's.
Okay, now let's say the person says that the absolute, like if all contingent realities came from absolute nothing, something that has no attributes.
Not something that has no attributes. It's just it. Because
I'm saying if someone says that, some, like, all of contingent reality comes from absolutely nothing, like something that has no attributes. First of all, like, I mean, that is very much problematic. How would you even explain that? And that defeats many of these principles that we take at face value, like the causal principle, and then reality becomes absurd. But what do you have to say about that?
Yeah. So the issue is that in order to say this, you have to do what Lawrence Krauss does. So the reason that
you can't treat that in the reasoning unless you give some attribute to nothing.
Yeah. So if there is nothing, there is no condition which something can pop into. Yeah, because to say something popped into nothing is to do what Lawrence Krauss did, and to treat nothing like it is something. And so nothing is both nothing and something simultaneously, which is a contradiction. Yeah, so in order to do this, you have to treat nothing like it's something. Yeah, which is to say that it is a thing with its existence on and off simultaneously.
Okay. Yeah. I get that.
Yeah, which is a contradiction.
Mm.
And therefore,
So I think this is a very good defeater for the first possibility. What about the second one?
Yeah.
Which is, I think, circular.
Yeah. So here, this can't be the case. Therefore, impossible existence. Yeah. So we can write that off.
Mm.
I'll
Yeah.
even make this bigger. I love this app, by the way. It's called Obsidian.
Yeah. Two things that, like, two comments I have. Firstly, like, this app is very helpful for people, like, to conceptually understand where we are going, where we start from. And secondly, your formulation of the dependency argument, Marshall, is also something which is very simplified in a sense where we're not using any philosophical jargon and stuff like that. So people can actually follow your
trying,
training.
and I'm trying to avoid it. It's unfortunately it pops
which is a
up.
good thing. No.
Yeah, it still pops up, but I do try to avoid it. Okay, so this one we can comfortably say it can't exist.
No, not so.
Well, yeah, I'll use these colors as well to help. So we'll say this one is blue, and this one is green. Yeah. So this one is an impossible existence. What we're looking for is that one of these has to become blue or green. If it's red, then we can't continue just assuming that there's no necessary existence. Yeah. If it becomes green, that means that like we've had to then we've fallen back now on this thing that we tried to assume doesn't exist, and one of these options has sort of thrown us into having to accept that. So circular dependency. What can we say about circular dependency? So a circular dependency, I would say, is problematic because it has to state that a thing exists and does not exist simultaneously in order for it to begin existing. So that problem because it states that a thing has to exist and not exist before its existence in order to begin existing. Now, apologies if that sounds annoying, because it is. Yeah, and this is the thing. It's like if you try to posit something like this and say this is what it is, it's just this big cycle and it comes back. In order for me to be born, I already have to be born. Like if we go back to that.
Yeah, and then you caused your great grandfather so that he caused
so that he could
your
yeah. That's a circular dependency, and each of these things isn't necessary. Each of these things has a beginning, which is to say that before its beginning, it did not exist.
It was off.
It was off. Yeah. So here I'm on, but prior to that, yeah, because I began to exist prior to the beginning, A was off. Yeah. So A was off. But the thing is in order for A to turn on at all, it's dependent upon things which, if you go back, the only way this can exist is if my existence is on as well.
Yeah.
Yep. Which is a problem. So this, again, is an issue. Yeah, because it is stating that in order for something to be circular dependent, that it has to be on and off at the same time. So then we're saying a thing needs to have. Oh wait, no, to exist and not exist at the same time. Existence is on and off simultaneously. Struggling with my spelling today. On and off simultaneously. Yeah, which is what? Can I copy and paste that? Yes, I can.
So in the meantime, like let me give you another example. So correct me if I'm wrong. So it is as if like, my phone example is dependent on my charger. My charger is dependent on electricity. Electricity are dependent on electrons basically. And now I have to say that electrons are, or the whole existence of electrons are dependent on my phone. My phone caused the existence of electrons.
Yeah. And that's just, that's absurd for many reasons. Yeah. It can't be the case that something is in existence and not existence in the same way at the same time in order to make sure that it can begin existing in the first place.
Yeah. So my phone had to, so if my phone caused the existence of electrons, it had to exist even prior to the creation of electrons.
Yeah.
And this is the cause of how electrons came in the universe. That is what I'm saying essentially.
Now, if they try to posit something, because there's another objection they could try to make here, and they could just sort of try to say, there's this sort of looping in time. And so there's a bit of like, there's some strange thing that goes on, and there's a loop in time. But then it raises the question as to why this thing exists at all as a whole. And what they end up having to try to posit is that, okay, if there is some sort of loop in time, then this thing becomes a necessary existence. Yeah, which is a problem, because the whole point of here is that we're trying to say that there isn't a necessary existence. So if we take one route and we're looking at it from this
way. So can you go back? So I have one question to the chart you created about the looping in time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so
you want me to go to the chart?
Yeah. So now again, now we have this loop. Now this thing itself, we have the question: is this thing contingent or is this thing necessary? The whole loop, the whole circle. Yeah. And if we say that this is contingent, again we go back to the same question. Like,
so we end up having to ask again.
What is it dependent upon?
Does this
because that would be dependent? Okay.
Yeah. So does this pop into existence from nothing?
Or is it always existing?
Yeah. Or does it always exist, which is to say that it's sort of like a necessary existence? Yeah. Okay. Or is it this, where you've just got this sort of infinite chain again before it? Or is it this, that it comes from nothing? It can't just be that it's a finite. The only way you can save this model is by trying to posit some type of looping in time. Yeah, and you play about with time in some funny way. But by doing that, you have to say that this thing is necessary. So the only way to save it. And you've got to remember that the only reason we're exploring these things is because we're assuming there is no necessary existence.
Right.
But if the only way to save this, the only way to save this is to insist it always existed, there is some loop in time, then this necessitates necessary existence, or this infers a necessary existence to the whole. Yep. And so then what we have is
impossible.
No, so
necessary.
Yeah, necessary.
Yeah, impossible. If you say that like, it is contingent, and then the whole question comes back to the below. Or if you're saying it's necessary, then of course we go back to there is a necessary existence.
Yeah, exactly.
Or they can take this route, maybe like to say that the whole loop is infinite, in the sense it goes back at infinitum, and then it is essential to deal with this category as well.
Yeah. And so now, okay, so if we're assuming there's no necessary existence, here, obviously, if we're going down this route, we're going to reject it, because it's that would just we'd be like, no, that's not possible. If you're trying to save it for whatever reason, like the only thing you can do is make it a necessary existence, which then means that you can't do that. Yeah, you can't just say that there's no necessary existence, which is the whole point. We're trying to see if we're trying to explore whether the necessary existence is equivalent to,
or they can think that the whole loop pop out of nothing, which is again impossible.
Yeah, because if you're going to say it comes from a thing, you're just bringing it back to that first one again. Yeah. So this one is in like a sort of quote unquote superposition. Like we're not quite sure if it's an impossible existence or a necessary existence or whatever. Then the last one is the infinite chain.
Yeah.
And my response to this one is that so I ask you a question. What does something why does something being infinite how do I word this question? So I would say that if you have an infinite chain of dependent things, it might be better wording it this way. My objection. If you have an infinite chain of dependent things, the whole chain is still dependent. And then the question is dependent upon what? Yeah. Someone might even say, no, this is actually the necessary existence. So that with this, there's another way you could say that infinite chains are impossible, which because it leads to contradictions. Infinite chain is impossible. Yeah, which means it's an impossible existence. Or they can try to save it by saying the infinite chain in the same way they did with the thingy is a necessary existence. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
So they can do one of these two things. This is going to be really nice for me once all this is done. Because we could just go through it without. Although I guess I don't know. What do you think? I think the act of typing it out as we go along is good.
Yeah, it is very time consuming, but good. Yeah, but then it's good that we formulate this, because many people, they learn through creating these diagrams, so they bifurcate those things in their mind, and this can be a very important resource that can help that category of people, and it helps us also as well.
There's a way of me, like, if you want this app, it's called Obsidian. It's like a note-taking app. So these could save as files that I might even be able to share as well, which would be pretty interesting. So if you have this app, if I send you the file, you can open this file with the app, and you should be able to see this.
So going through, like, like someone, we can just take the whole route. So yeah, this is a very good idea.
Yeah, and we can just try and build on it and stuff. It'd be cool if like there was a collaborative option for building these things, but I don't think the app has gotten to that point yet. And there's loads of like mods you can get for the app as well to customize it and do things. You can also add things like pictures and stuff like that, or documents. You can link other notes as well. So if you've got other notes, there's a book on how to take smarter notes, I think. And this is sort of inspired by slip box method, it's called. But I can't recommend it enough. It's so cool. So
moving back to
so moving back to this, so either it contains, because I'm sure if you've gotten this far that you're probably familiar with objections to infinite chains.
So my first point would be, like, for me, like, when we posit an infinite chain of dependencies, what we are essentially saying is, for this thing to come into existence or to exist, it is dependent on something else, and that is dependent on something else, and that is dependent on something else. It is as if like for example, if I'm standing near a vending machine and I need the chocolate bar in my hand, and for the chocolate bar to be in my hand, I have to put, let's say, 2-3 pounds, like a coin of 2 pounds in the vending machine. I I don't have 2 pounds. I have to be dependent on someone else to give me 2 pounds. I ask you, you say you also don't have 2 pounds. You then actually ask someone next to you, let's say a student next to you, and he says he also does not have 2 pounds. So will that, if that chain goes back at infinitum, I don't think in this example I would ever be able to actually achieve putting 2 pounds in the vending machine and gain that chocolate bar in my hand. So if we are saying that like, there is an infinite chain of dependencies, to me it seems like then existence itself would never come into being, because everything is off. And saying like, for this thing to be on, that thing has to be on. For this light to be on, that thing has to be on. But then if that is going by like infinitum, there is not something that has always been on, then it does not even make sense how this thing that I have in my hand, like phone, and for example, this light, how is this on in the first place? Like,
Yeah.
mine is very
Oh,
sharp.
mashallah, yours is so much brighter than mine.
Yeah. So existence would not even happen. Like, this is what I think. So that is where there becomes an issue where existence is not possible. But the fact that, for example, you see, I have a chocolate bar in my hand, I already have it, then that can help you infer that at some point in the chain, there has to be something that is not dependent on gaining 2 pounds from someone else. It already has it, and only then the chain of lending begins, and that is where I actually gain something, which is the chocolate bar in my hand. What do you think?
Yeah. There's lots of paradoxes or examples that they put forward to show why an infinite regress is impossible. Yeah, and this would, if you accept these arguments,
infinite regress of dependencies. Yeah.
In any infinite regress at all, if you accept that an infinite regress is impossible, then you're just not going to accept the infinite regress. Yeah, and so then here,
and also one thing, like some people even try to defend a kind of an infinite regress, but that is a kind of infinite regress with maybe giving some theory of time or something like that, and then they try to establish that. But when it comes to an infinite regress of dependencies, I think like, that is a big issue which still cannot be resolved in some sense.
Yes, yeah. To be honest, what it might be better doing here is connecting this here to this. So what we'll notice here essentially is that you've got these three things, these three possibilities of how this can express itself. This one is just impossible. Yeah, it doesn't posit that there's any necessary existence whatsoever. It's just an impossible existence. This one and this one, you can see here that they both break off into two things. Either you have to explain it in such a way that makes it an impossible existence and therefore not the case, or you have to explain it in a way that actually makes it a necessary existence, which means the answer to this question is you cannot assume that there is no necessary existence.
Right. And one thing to clarify, like without a necessary existence, like an infinite regress is impossible. There has to be, I think maybe that is what you were talking about. So there has to be a necessary existence. And from that, maybe some people might infer that there is but that is, of course, an issue.
So if like one way you could do it is if you do accept that infinite regresses are impossible, that would also apply here, because you've sort of got this infinite chain, infinite temporally, because it goes around and around and around and around, and it does so ad infinitum. Yeah. So like if you do not accept infinite regresses, and the reason I'm saying it this way is because some people they're not convinced by the arguments against an infinite regress. The path I'm going to take you is like, obviously you've got an easy peasy thing going here. If you do think that infinite regresses are impossible, you are convinced by those arguments, then you're led, if all of these three things are impossible, so if those three things are impossible, then there must be a necessary thing. Yeah. So, and that would link to this. So that would link there. That would link there. We'll make that a bit bigger. Oop. Yeah, so if those three things are the case, we'll even make these lines green as well, because we're gangster.
So can we just go over back to why an infinite regress may lead to a necessary being, and why or an impossible existence?
Yeah. So this comes to my objection. So my objection to this, we'll do these red just so that you can see. If you have an infinite chain of dependent things in any way, temporally, dependently, whatever it is, then I would say that the whole chain is dependent. And the reason I say this is because dependency is the type of attribute that can be inferred from the part to the whole. Because here, an objection to my objection would be, this is the fallacy. The fallacy of composition.
Okay.
And then we just have to have a discussion about why it's not a fallacy of composition. So what is the fallacy of composition?
Yeah.
Go on.
Go ahead. The fallacy of composition, I mean, to me would be, they might say that we cannot, if we know, like, things that work on the part, we cannot sum it to the whole. But then I have an issue with the fallacy of composition is, I think, and this is what you also mentioned, that fallacy of composition in certain contexts apply, in certain contexts it does not apply. In certain contexts it would apply on relative things, like the elephant is made out of cells are small, but elephant is big. But that is relative to how you see, elephants being big and your definition of big and small. But then there are, for example, other examples. If you are, for example, creating a castle out of all red bricks and nothing else, you cannot say that the castle can turn to be blue. You have to infer that the castle would be red in color. Is that correct?
Yeah. The one I usually go for is so here's an example of when the fallacy of composition would apply. And the definition is very specific, although the definition I use at the fallacy of composition is, at least, it is not always okay to infer an attribute from the part to the whole. And that's true. It's not always okay. Like if I say this brick is small, therefore wall is small. If I'm talking about the Great Wall of China, I'd be very wrong. This atom is small, therefore the thing made of atoms is small. That's a fallacy of composition. I am you and you are made up of atoms. We're no way near small in the same sense that atoms are. All the universe is made up of atoms, therefore the universe is small. No, obviously not. That's not an inference you can make. Yeah. So here we're asking, so when does the fallacy apply or not? Well, what makes it apply or what makes it not? I've got caps lock on. Yeah. So what makes it apply? So here we've got, like, for example, the attribute small, of small or big. Yeah. The brick is example. This brick is small. This brick or this atom is small. Therefore, the wall is small. Yeah, that's a fallacy of composition. Yeah. Okay, but are there any examples where that? And you mentioned color, and the one I usually go for is the brick is made of rock. The wall,
that's better.
Yeah, the wall is made. And the reason I do that is because with color, there's weird little objections.
Something can be dodgy. Yeah. And
Yeah.
someone can come up with a
what if he's colorblind or blah blah blah, or like color's subjective. But like if something is made of rock, so the brick, this is when it is a fallacy. When it's not. So the brick is made of rock, therefore the wall. Oh wait, the wall is made of bricks, therefore the wall is made of rock. I wish the one pet peeve I do have about this app, I wish it expanded the box as you type. The wall.
Oh yeah, save tiny
from rock. This is not a fallacy. Yeah, you can infer from this. Yeah, from the part to the whole, because the fact that the brick is made of rock, that type of attribute is something that does apply to the whole. If someone was to come to you and say, this brick is made of rock, this wall is made of those bricks, and then they say, therefore the wall is not made of brick, it's not made of rock. Sorry. Yeah. So if someone says that to you, you would instantly recognize that cannot be the case.
Right.
That cannot be the case. It cannot be the case that simply because the brick is made of rock, if the wall is made up of these rock bricks, the wall has to be made from brick. Not only is it absurd to suggest otherwise, it's necessary. You have to say that the whole wall is made out of bricks. And then so the question is okay, so what kind of difference is it between these two? Yeah. So what makes these two different? So between these two examples, this one is a relative quality. Yeah. So it's dependent. It's a relative quality. What makes something small depends on what you're talking about. In relation to what? Depends on relation and what you're talking about compared to what. Yeah. So that's a relative quality, and this is a non-relative quality. It doesn't matter. Yeah, like who's looking at it. Not a relative quality. Or you could maybe even call it an objective quality.
Okay, so this clears the whole doubt about the fallacy of composition, because we know that the things that are contingent, that is an objective quality, that is not relative to anyone's perception.
Exactly. It's the same.
So
okay. Yeah, exactly.
So we have clarified that the fallacy of composition does not apply to this example. Now, if we try to go back and see the whole infinite chain that we were talking about, we can apply that the whole sum is itself contingent. Is that correct?
Yeah. So if we're going from here, so just to recap what we've done here.
Yeah.
So the only way to, so we've started We said, what is there?
Hmm.
Yeah, what is there? Contingent things. We can see contingent things. And then we've pointed out how existence has two modes, on and off. And then if you've only got these two modes, you've got these three possible things, quote unquote. You've got these three options, either a contingent existence, possible existence, and necessary existence. We know contingent things exist, so we don't need to argue for that. We know impossible things can't exist by definition. And so the only other thing we need to really ask about is a necessary existence. So we start by just assuming that we've not seen it with our eyes. We've not experienced the necessary existence. So if we just assume that there is no necessary existence, which is what we're doing here, what are the possibilities? We've outlined those possibilities. We've shown that the first one is impossible. And so that can't be the case.
Things
and then the
cannot
other
come out from nothing.
Yeah,
circular loop, not possible.
Yeah, if you say that it's an impossible existence, and the last possibility, if you say that's an impossible existence, then it's not possible that there is only contingent things. Yeah.
So one thing I want to go back to is infinite chain. You mentioned the whole chain itself would be contingent. So how would that lead to maybe a necessary existence or an impossible existence?
Repeat that question.
So if you have an infinite chain, and I want to see how we infinite chains are, firstly we can show how they are impossible existence. So that's a route that we take. Now another route you take that they are necessary. So if they are necessary, we already established that something is necessary.
Yes.
Now under all these, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. So if you've established all of these three options are impossible, the question is there only contingent things? If these are the only options, if there is only contingent things, if each of these are impossible, that means there's not only contingent things. It can't be that other than contingent things, there are impossible things. The only other option is that it's a necessary thing.
And so one question.
These are necessary. Continue.
Sorry to cut you off. Just one question I want to understand is, let's say someone is giving you an infinite chain and he's saying that, yes, the whole chain is contingent itself. So then what are we showing? Like, first of all, it is an impossible existence. Why? Because where did this whole chain come from? Is that what we are inferring here? Or the example that I gave you about the vending machine where existence would not even come into existence? What are we trying? How would we establish that?
Yeah, so with these two, we're not necessarily objecting to them immediately. Okay. We're just exploring it with someone. And so they say, okay, they can either try and explain it in two ways. One way makes it an impossible existence. The other way kind of saves it, but it makes it so that it's not a case in which there are only contingent things. Because the set is, as a whole, they're trying to say that's all there is. There's not this thing outside of it. Just they're trying to escape the idea of an external independent thing which is necessary. They're saying no, the chain, the universe, and this chain of dependencies, whether it's circular or infinite in a linear line, these things as a whole, that set is the necessary thing. It always has been. Its existence is impossible. It's impossible that circular chain could have not existed. It's impossible that infinite chain could not have existed. It always has been the case, and it always will be the case, and it will never cease to be. Yeah. So that is, again, that's positing. It's describing these things in a way that the set as a whole, so the whole chain of circular dependencies or the whole chain of infinite dependencies, are the necessary existence.
Got it.
So, the only way you can save these two is by turning them into the thing that you tried to assume didn't exist.
Okay, I get it. Or they might say that this chain pop out of nothing, which is an impossible existence again.
Yes.
Which will go to option one. So now they have either it is an impossible existence or is it a necessary existence. They have no other route left.
Exactly. So the only thing we're trying to do here, like these reds are like dead ends. And if you reach a dead end, then you've got to go back to something else. Yeah. Because it can, either it's this, it cannot be that, and this is in question. And we're trying to saying, okay, this is essentially the same thing as that. We're going to say that the only thing that we can affirm are the things that we see with our eyes, the contingent things, the things that we do experience. Is that possible? And then we're going, no, that one's not possible. No, that one's not possible. No, that one's not possible. Therefore, this must exist. Yeah. Okay. Or if you try to save these two, yeah, because essentially what we're doing here when we're trying to say this is the case, yeah, when we're talking about the argument for dependency, the theistic case here, so the theistic position is that there is an independent necessary being with godly attributes. Yeah. I cannot. So there's an independent necessary being with godly attributes, which is distinct from the set of all contingent things which depend upon it. Yeah, so to visualize that, so the theistic position is not this, it's not this, it's not this. Okay. The theistic position is that you have a necessary being and this has the quality of necessity, independence, etc. You know, the qualities we outlined here. These ones. Let me go. How do I make a box? That's typing it. Type, double click. Can add text by double clicking anywhere. Did that work? I don't get. Oh. All right, that's tiny. I don't know what to do with that. Can I make it bigger? Yeah, so essentially we're saying that this thing here has these attributes. Yeah. And that there is another thing, which is the set of all contingent things. And this could be finite or infinite. It's irrelevant.
Okay. Yeah. So some people might say that, oh, that the universe did not have a cause, it is eternal and stuff like that. We, at least in this discussion, we are not, or at least in this topic, we are not trying to focus on if did the universe have a beginning or not, and we're just trying to focus on if there is a necessary being, or is there is a necessary existence or not.
But you'll notice this version is completely different than these. Yeah, because what we're saying is that the set as a whole, because even these, like, so with this one, either it's impossible, like we said, or they might say this is the necessary being, or you've got this one, it's an infinite chain, and they say this one is the necessary being. So they're trying to say this is a necessary being, that this isn't needed because that is necessary.
Right.
Yeah. Our position is that no, that can't be the case. This is contingent. Yeah, regardless of whether it is finite or infinite. Whether it's finite or infinite, this is contingent, and therefore that it requires something outside of it that is itself not contingent, because if it is, it would be in that set. You following so far?
So this is, I think, maybe step 2. If we try to summarize step 1, we at least up till now we were able to at least show some necessity of there being a necessary being, which anyone cannot escape. Any escape route that they take, we showed how it reaches to a dead end. And the pathway, since we're talking about pathways, it opens up to the possibility of necessary being existing. But now we are seeing who that necessary being is, or what that necessary being is. Either is it, if someone can put it within the category of contingent beings, or it has to be outside the category of contingent beings, or within the universe, or something that is like tangible with or non-tangible, something along those lines. Is that correct?
Yeah, essentially. So like this, the first stage is there a necessary being? And I think we've gotten to a point where we've shown that is the case. And maybe we could wrap up here, and then we can move on with another step at another time, because there's a lot of detail, because we've still got a long way to go. All we've done at the moment is prove this. Yeah, this bit here.
Yeah.
But we've still got to show, for example, that it has a will, that it's all powerful, that, you know, so on and so forth. But the point of this here is to just show that all of this leads to affirming that this can be the case. Yeah. So we could say here, let's try and conclude. So what makes these two different? So contingency is not a relative quality. Yeah. Is not a relative quality and can be inferred from the part to the whole. So if in these chains, when we're talking about set theory, so if I say, for those of you familiar with math, it might be a bit easy for you, but set theory is that you make a set. So say, for example, we've got this set here, and we call it the set of all dogs. Yeah. Now, what that means is anything that matches the description of this thing, we throw that on the pile. We put it into the set. Over here, you might have the set of all cats. Anything with that description is in that set. Yeah. You can't say, oh, there's this other thing over here, and this is a cat, and it and then talk about it externally from that. No, this thing is already in there, because this is the set of all cats. This is the set of all dogs. Here, we're saying the set of all contingent things. If anything is dependent, it's in that set. It's in that pile. Yeah. And that's what we're doing this. If it's in it, the thing with the argument as it goes, because there's still some more things we can say, because what we've done here is we've shown that all of these things lead you to saying that there's a necessary existence. So now, how do we show that this one can't be the necessary existence and this one can't be the necessary existence? Yeah. So that's what we're doing with this objection. So my objection, these can't be the necessary existence. That's the point of this. Yeah, this is important. These can't be the necessary existence. Yeah. And the reason we've given that these can't be the necessary existence is because the fallacy of composition doesn't apply to the attribute of contingency. Yeah. And that if these things, because remember we're talking about sets, if this circular dependency is made up of a set of dependent things, then the circular chain dependency is
contingent in the end.
It's a contingent, and so it requires something outside of it. So you cannot say that if you're assuming there's no necessary existence, you can't do that. Yeah, because you can't say this is a necessary existence. The whole point of this is that you cannot say, yeah, this is a necessary. I cannot say this is Yeah, and it's the same with this one.
Okay.
Yeah, so you cannot say that either of these are the necessary existence because of all this, and therefore, whatever. You get the point. You can't say that's a necessary existence. You can't say that's a necessary existence. So it's none of these options, because the only way you could ever save these is by trying to make them a necessary existence, but you can't do that.
Yeah, but you cannot make a combination of necessary and, put them in the mixer and create something necessary out of it. If individual things within them are contingent, the whole is also contingent in the end. So if necessary being has to be established, there has to be something outside of that set of contingent things. Yeah. That's what you're trying to establish.
So the conclusion of that is you cannot. The conclusion of that of exploration, you cannot suggest there is no independent necessary existence. Which is to say that the only other way is option number 4. You have independent necessary existence, and distinct from this, so we'll say, maybe a better way of doing that would be this way. Distinct from this is a set of contingent things. The set is itself contingent, which is to say the set is dependent on the necessary being. Yeah, which is this one. Yeah, we've got all these extra attributes we need to do, but for the time being, like this one here, that's a terrible circle. So these ones, that we've shown that at least that there is this thing here, it's a necessary being, and there is a distinct thing by necessity. Whether it is finite or infinite is irrelevant. Yeah, so you don't even have to get into the debate about whether or not the infinite regress exists. If someone accepts the infinite regress is impossible, then all right, happy days. You've then you've proved that there must be a necessary being. If they don't accept the infinite regress is impossible, and you could just, for the sake of argument, then say, okay, that's fine. I'll, for the sake of argument, just say that the infinite regress is possible. Whether or not I accept that is irrelevant to this. It's just you're giving it them for the sake of it, and you're going to explore to see if that makes a difference. Yeah. And then what we do is we say, well, no, it doesn't make a difference, because even if the set is infinite, if all of the things in there are dependent, then the whole thing is dependent as well. Because the question is what's the quantity got to do? Because remember, we were talking about the bricks. If you say that there is one brick and that brick is made of rock, okay, that brick is dependent. If you have 1,000,000 bricks and you make a wall out of them, and each of the bricks is dependent, then the wall is dependent. And you can increase the number as much as you want to infinity if you want. How is it the case that this objective attribute, when talking about the part, when you're talking about the whole, what does infinity do to make that whole thing all of a sudden have the opposite attribute of its independent parts? Because if the brick, and it's like when I gave the example, if the brick is made of rock, it's like someone saying that the wall is not made of rock. Yeah. And in the same way, if you say that the brick is dependent, and then you have a wall made of infinite number of dependent bricks, but the wall is not dependent. Yeah, you're attributing the opposite attribute. You might like, what do you mean? Where does this magic ability for it to switch? You wouldn't accept that with any objective quality. You wouldn't accept that if someone said that the wall is made of brick, but the bricks are made of rock. Therefore, the wall. If someone said to you that like every single part of it is made of this objective attribute, you wouldn't negate that from the whole. Yeah. And so that's the point here, is that like you can't do that. Yeah, and so you end up having to say, well, then these things can't be necessary. It's not possible.
So going back to the switch example that you gave, I think there has to be something which, like, has the light on. It has always been on. Like, it has to be eternal. It has to always be on. And the things that we see in these two examples, the two examples that you mentioned, those are the ones which, like, can be off and on. So within this example, we haven't reached that thing which, like, has to always be on no matter what you do. Is that correct?
Repeat the question.
No, it was more like a statement where, for example, when we took the example of switches on and off, there are three possibilities. One is will always be off. The light will always be off, like the existence would never come out. One is with the existence can be off and can be on. And the one is where the existence will always be on. Within that, so within the two possibilities, that one is taking a root to, like, in a sense, is taking a root and saying this is the necessary existence. Within the chain, I can switch off everything within the chain, which I see within the two examples that we are showing, everything can be switched off. So there isn't anything that can be switched on, like which will always be on no matter how much I play with the switchboard. So that there isn't anything necessary in there where they're showing that they're like, this is the necessary existence, but there isn't anything necessary within that.
Yeah, exactly.
So we haven't reached that.
Where does necessity come from? That's the question. If there's no thing in it that has necessity, then how can the whole thing become necessary? How can, if you just because you piled these things up together, where does this complete opposite attribute come from? That's the problem. And they've not really ever given a good reason as to why we should accept, because and as well, often the case is that the objectors here are atheists that are big on the scientific method. There are countless examples of sets of contingent things and the set being dependent as a whole. Like take any set of any particular kind of contingent thing, all of them, every single one of those examples, the set as a whole is always still dependent. Yeah. So, and that's, like, there's probably more evidence for this than there is anything else. Like, they'll accept conclusions about atoms based on experiments with a tiny data set. Like, how many atoms are in the universe and how many atoms have they done experiments on to be able to come to conclusions about atoms and say, atoms do this, atoms do that. We can say this about an atom, so on and so forth, based on their experiments with a tiny, tiny data set compared to the whole. Yeah. With regards to contingent things, we've got way more data about sets of contingent things being dependent than we have anything else. Yeah. So if you're going to try and tell me that the set of all contingent things should have the opposite attribute, that we should say they are not contingent.
Yeah.
We should say that they are that the set is necessary. You want me to attribute this wild thing, as far as I'm concerned, you need a hell of a lot of arguments for that. You need like a decent amount of evidence to justify me leaning towards saying that the set of contingent things is necessary, when I've got a lot of evidence already that pushes me in the opposite direction. I've got a lot of good reason to say that the set as a whole is contingent. I've got no good reason other than a hypothetical that they put forward, which I think is very problematic, that it's necessary. Yeah. And the whole point here is that, like, we are forced into, and they can, so, and a lot of philosophers, by the way, do concede this model, yeah, without the godly attributes. They say that there is a necessary being and that it's distinct. They just don't want to call it God. Maybe they argue that you can't give it attributes like a will or whatever. And this might lead to deism. So you have like this deist being that's generating things, but it isn't interested, or it isn't personal, or it's like this machine, not in a typical sense as we understand it, like some sort of supernatural, quote unquote, machine, like a multiverse generator that's just spitting out universes. And the obviously the whole point now, when we go into arguments with the rest of these things, is to then try and get them to understand that is not, that's not the case. It's not just a multiverse generator, or that if you want to call it a multiverse generator, that there are good arguments to say this quote unquote multiverse generator still has these attributes, and therefore is exactly what we would just call a god. It's just you don't like the word God for whatever reason. Yeah. And then you've got to explore that. Why don't, what's your problem with calling it God? If the definition of God is something that has these attributes, then it's a personal preference for the noise that you make, which at that point it becomes silly. So
Alhamdulillah, like, we have covered a lot of ground in this time, and I see what reason entails us to establish is that there has to be a necessary existence. It has to be eternal, and something that, reason would lead us, and that, all the denying options are kind of cancelled out in some way. We've seen it. If one follows reason, at least they'll come to this conclusion about the necessary being. So in terms of this episode, I think, alhamdulillah, it was a very deep dive, and we covered a lot of ground. We covered maybe some objections related to that. So in terms of the next step, now the next step is going to be who this or trying to establish other attributes of this necessary being. This is maybe the next route. So do you think we can cover this now, or do you think we have another episode maybe to cover that? Maybe the second stage of this argument.
I'm going to have to go in about 15 minutes, so I can maybe cover this now. Actually, I'd say what, we're probably best leaving it. Because I want to go into things like the design argument and things like that, and I may need more than 15 minutes, because we mentioned here there are lots of arguments for God's existence. With this, like, if you accept this, sometimes people don't even need to go into the whole necessary thing, and they can just accept it fitri. But with this, I think as well, it adds these other attributes to it, and and we can explore it.
And the good thing is, now that the main tedious part has been established, and then we can smoothly in the next episode deal with other things. Like, I was speaking to Joshua Rasmussen, and he says that the contingency or the dependency argument is more like a skeleton, which once you frame the skeleton, then all of the other arguments for God's existence, you can nicely fit in all of them. So since we've just established that there has to be something necessary, maybe in the next episode we can one by one, see what arguments we can establish, which can be attributes ascribed to the necessary being. So that would be a good exploration, inshallah.
Yeah, perfect. Right, we'll leave it there. I'm gonna need to shoot, but yeah, I think we've done a pretty good job at going over that. And then maybe as well, if anyone wants to sort of leave any comments with any other things that would like to ask, or they would like us to explore in the next episode, maybe it might be worth just putting it in the comments, and we could possibly bring them up the next time we meet.
Inshallah. Any objections that someone thinks that they we haven't dealt with, maybe we can also address that as well in the comments.
Yeah, and we can
Jazakallah khairan.
Fancy picture.
And like, I was thinking that it might take us 2 hours, but now it took us more than 2 hours just to cover one aspect of God's existence. So alhamdulillah.
But that's what I said to you when you asked. He's like, oh, do you think you could talk about this for like 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 hours? Not like, and this is just one line of reasoning.
Right.
But I thrive off this stuff. I find it fun. Like it's like a game for me.
Alhamdulillah.
Nice.
And it's new. It's like, all the use of diagrams and the kind of bifurcating things, which helps. Like, just talking without this, there's something that's missing. So alhamdulillah, there is something that we are adding to this discussion.
Yeah,
and maybe you can
I've noticed that as well. People find it very hard to track the conversation. When you've got an image like this, you can kind of see where we've gone and where, like, because sometimes if you don't have a graph like this, by the time you get here, people forget what's happened because we've said so much, and it's hard to visualize where you are in that journey. Whereas with this, you can like constantly go back and go, okay, so yeah, we did that. We're asking this question. We're exploring the possibilities. And then we've started with an assumption and we've gone into the possibilities. If that assumption is true, what are the options? If all of these options are impossible, then that goes back here. That must be something that exists. If you don't, if you want to insist that these are infinite in some way, or you don't want to concede to the infinite regress, then again, this necessitates these are necessary beings. Why can't these be necessary beings? My objection. We go through that, and then, okay, that can't be a necessary being. So the only thing you can say is that it is itself contingent. If it's contingent, it's impossible. Therefore, the necessary being exists. And then if those three options are impossible, you're left by necessity picking the fourth, which is that one. The independent necessary existence distinct from this is a set of contingent things. The set is itself, the set of contingent things is itself contingent. The set is dependent on the necessary being, on the necessary existence.
Subhanallah. So now we also got a nice summary from our brother Ponders through the whole map. And since we have established that on this note, I mean, we can end on the topic of necessary being. And, I hope people enjoyed the discussion and would look forward to actually seeing what's going to come next. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff. I think I have a lot to add maybe for the next part, which is establishing will and other things. These are known as second stage arguments. So I look forward to speaking with you soon, inshallah. And Jazakallah khairan for your time and for all of the effort and, creating all this beautiful diagram for us. We'll see you soon.
We built it as we went along as well. We didn't have any. There was nothing here at the beginning. But it's nice because like we went through it together. We built this image together, and hopefully you guys were like following along as we were going through it. And I've got a feeling that because there are people that are really good at listening, and when they listen, they can track a conversation really well. Some people are visual learners, and they like a lot of people when they're listening to the argument for dependency or the contingency argument, it's so hard for them to follow because they get lost in because if you look at that, it's pretty big.
Right.
And I've not even written everything down here. I've just sort of quote unquote bullet pointed it. It's a massive summary of the whole process that we're taking. All for this here, this main conclusion, which is this. So alhamdulillah, but we'll leave it there. Jazakallah khair for having me, and I look forward to the next one, inshallah.
Thank you for coming, and inshallah, I'm very excited for the next episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.